Hi, everybody. I am in the classroom today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the basics of developmentally appropriate practice, which we refer to as DAP or DAP, developmentally appropriate practice. What is it? It is teaching young children in ways that match where they are. So, a very obvious example of it would be it's not developmentally appropriate to try to teach a toddler how to write their name, right? They don't have the physical development, they don't have the cognitive development. A toddler, like an 18-month-old, probably doesn't know their letters or how their letters relate to each other. Writing is not a skill they're going to be able to understand or be able to do physically. And so it's not developmentally appropriate to try to teach a toddler how to write their name. Is it developmentally appropriate to teach a toddler, to recognize the first letter of their first name? Sure, um, because it's for them at that age, it's the equivalent of a picture. And we'll talk more about that later. But so it's really looking at where an individual is in their development. So let's say a 3-year-old, how that individual's development relates to a group, right? So if you have a class of young children that you're teaching, and they're 3 years old, you want to target your teaching toward teaching 3-year-olds. Now, you might have some children in that class who are especially advanced developmentally and some that are developmentally behind. And so you need to target to the majority, right? And develop special ways of reaching out to those other kids, right? So that's developmentally appropriate. Helping each child reach challenging and achievable goals that contribute to his or her ongoing development and learning. So what we want to do is talk about what's challenging and achievable for each child and figuring out how that works. And that's developmentally appropriate practice. What is intentionality? An intentional teacher has clearly defined goals for children. And like I said, those goals are based on what's developmentally appropriate, right? They're choosing teaching strategies that will help children achieve those goals. They're assessing children's progress and adjusting strategies to reach those goals. And they can tell parents, administrators, and colleagues why they're doing what they're doing, right? And that's one of the most important things that you should be getting out of your classes at Parkland in early childhood is the explanation of why you're doing what you're doing. So, what is developmentally appropriate? What is age appropriate? What's appropriate for a child in the given age range that you're working with? What's individually appropriate? So, each child who's 3 years old may not be able to do the same things as every other child. So you need to think about what's individually appropriate for each child, and then what's appropriate to the social and cultural contexts in which the children live. So an example of this might be when my kids were little, I had friends who were Mediterranean, Greek, Turkish, and their children, when they were very young, didn't learn, they were not as encouraged to feed themselves. Like, independent feeding was not as big a deal with some of my friends from other cultures as it was with me. And that was simply because it's a cultural thing. It's a nurturing thing to feed your babies, even if your babies are 5 years old, right? And the culture that I grew up in, independence was highly prized and being able to do things on your own. And it didn't feel like like you were less nurturing of a parent if you were teaching your child to feed themselves. So that's an instance where cultural and social contexts determine what's appropriate. Okay. How young children learn and develop. They learn through relationships with responsive adults, hands-on involvement, meaningful experiences, and constructing their own understanding. Basically, what that means is young children learn and develop through doing, right? They're having a relationship with you, they're having conversations, they're building their social skills and their emotional development by working with a teacher or adults, by exploring, being outside, digging in the dirt, playing with Legos and blocks, all those kinds of active hands-on things. Meaningful experiences, things that connect to the world that they live in and that they understand. So talking about families, talking about pets, talking about things that they see in the world around them, as opposed to things, concepts that are too large for them to grab or not in their everyday experience. And then they are making up what they understand as they go along. And what's interesting is that you will see that children, and you could probably think about yourself in this way, you think you understand something, and then later on you realize, wait, I had a completely wrong or different understanding of that. And as I grew older and I matured, I got a better understanding of it. Kids are doing that all the time. So, what are we going to do as developmentally appropriate practitioners or teachers of developmentally appropriate practice? There are 5 aspects of it. So, one is creating a caring community of learners, right? So, making sure you have a classroom where everyone feels like they're an important part. Teaching to enhance development and learning, being very specific in your teaching so that you're doing the things that children need to develop and learn. Curriculum planning appropriate curriculum that matches where they need to be learning and also is interesting to them, right? Assessment, watching, observing, seeing how children are learning, making sure that their learning and development is on track. And then developing relationships with families, right? So, creating a caring community of learners is basically making sure that kids are healthy and safe in your classroom, that your classroom is interesting and gives places to explore, that it takes into account changing learning needs. So, especially in a classroom where you have toddlers or younger children, you're going to start out the school year, with a whole bunch of toys, which you're probably going to change out throughout the year because their skills will develop, their interests will develop, right? So you're trying to create a place where it's clear, I belong here, I'm safe, I matter, and everyone else in the group matters. And when we have problems, we can work things out. And together we can do great things. This message right here is something that maybe you want to just print out and paste on the wall in your classroom, because it's important to remember as you go through your day, is the classroom feeling like this for all the kids in it? And then how do you provide guidance in this classroom? Well, you want to make sure that you are guiding children in a way that's positive, that you are showing them that it's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. It's okay to talk about feelings, and you listen and you encourage children to talk about their feelings and their frustrations. Helping them solve their own conflicts and modeling problem solving skills, showing them how it's done, and then patiently and gently reminding them of the rules and why we have them. Okay, so you are going to teach to enhance development and learning. Anyone who's been in a classroom knows that you need a whole bunch of different strategies to help kids, and you need to figure out which works with which kids at what time, right? Something that works today may not work tomorrow. Something that worked yesterday may not work, today. And so it's important to have a whole wide range of teaching strategies available so that you can pull them out when you need them, right? So you're going to acknowledge, you're going to encourage, you're going to give specific feedback. And as you can see, it says good job and it's crossed out there. Good job is a nice thing to say, but it's not terribly meaningful for children. And it doesn't give them tools to move forward. Good job is a thing that you say, when a kid is right there and hands you a picture, and you need to give them immediate feedback. But what you really need to be doing, what you should be doing the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, is looking at what they're doing, engaging with them, talking about what they're doing, saying, oh, I see you spent a lot of time on this Lego castle. Tell me about how you decided what to do. I think you worked really hard on this Play-Doh. What was the best part of it? Specific feedback is saying, I saw what you did. I liked what you did. I know I am acknowledging your effort rather than good job, which says, oh, great, you're done. Good job. It doesn't really give them the feedback that they need to know what to do next time. Modeling, demonstrating, adding challenges or creating challenges. Children will um, work up to challenges. Sometimes I think we don't set our expectations high enough, and it allows children to just sort of go, oh, well, I did the best I could. Adding a challenge often engages children more and gives them a much better sense of accomplishment. Giving cues, hints, or other assistance, providing information, giving directions. These are all ways that you're teaching, right? And then you want to scaffold your children's learning. Scaffolding is helping them, but not doing it for them, providing the least amount of support the child needs to do something he can't quite do on his own. A very concrete example of this is in the winter time when it's time for everybody to put their coats on, right? So everybody has to try putting their coat on. And then you can help them, if you need to help get an arm in a sleeve, but everybody has to try first. Same thing with zipping up, right? The only way a kid's going to learn to do something is if he tries it on their own. If you do it every time, it's not going to help them learn it. So setting them a challenge of, oh, I want you to try it first. And then if you need my help, I'll help you, but I bet you can do it. And then using a variety of different learning formats, large groups, small groups, play and engagement in learning centers, and daily routines. So we'll talk a lot about all of this as we go through the semester, but this is important parts of being a professional teacher and having a developmentally appropriate classroom. Planning an appropriate curriculum. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, and we'll especially talk about this in program planning, which is CHD 124, which starts next week, I think. You want to think about, first of all, what do you want children to learn, right? So what do you want them to learn? How do you get there? And when you figure out what you want them to learn, you need to think about experiential ways that you can get them there, right? You don't want to think about worksheets and that kind of stuff. You want to think about the most involved, engaged way you can get them to your learning goal for them, okay? You want your curriculum to relate to the world around them. So if you're learning about science, you want to learn about, oh my gosh, the leaves outside are changing. Why is that happening? What does that mean, right? Or you're learning about snow. How does it work? What is it? That kind of thing. Things that are happening in their life, you can bring into the classroom and use that in a science lesson, in a math lesson, or a language lesson. Thinking about how you look at the world around you and bring that into the classroom. Because the way that they are learning things is they're seeing what's happening and they're figuring it out. And so your job is to help them figure out really what's going on. Developmental paths that children follow in a determined sequence. So the pace of learning experiences. You have to do counting before you can do adding. You have to do scribbling before you can do writing letters. And sometimes we try to move those things too quickly. So it's important to understand this is a developmental continuum that's happening, and where is the child and how can I help them? And then thinking about what you've learned before. Remember when we read that book about the mouse? Well, we know that mice in the winter come inside, and that's why we have a mouse trap in our classroom now, or, whatever. And then depth. Sometimes children, you'll want to move on from a topic, but the kids really want to stay with it. So it's important that you give them the space and the opportunity to continue learning about something. Assessment is monitoring their development and learning, making sure that you are checking in on everybody to make sure that their development is following in a path, and if necessary, directing them to special services or supports, right? And you do this by observing, right? And then developing relationships with families. Families are children's first teachers, and a lot of times you're going to be their second one. So they know a lot about children. They know a lot about that specific child. They will be able to tell you what you need to know. And conversely, children are often very different at school than they are at home. And so parents want to know how that child is behaving. A lot of times, I used to have this a lot. Parent teacher conferences, they would say, "Oh, he's so terrible. He just talks all the time, blah, 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 blah." And I would say, "Wow, that's not really what I'm seeing in class, but it's very interesting that you would say that." Or, um, the things that parents worried the most about often we either didn't see in class or it was so minor that it wasn't that big a deal. So it's important that you have those conversations and you share your experiences in a respectful way so that you're not all like, oh, well, he doesn't misbehave in class. I must be a very good teacher and you're a bad parent, that kind of thing. You want it to be positive. You want parents to feel welcome. You want them to feel like they, there's a comfort level in working with you. And you also want to make sure that you are respecting their goals and preferences, right? Some parents aren't that interested in their children learning to read in preschool, right? And so that's not a big deal. Most parents think that children should be learning to read in preschool. I personally don't. But what you can help them understand is that the things that you're doing in preschool will help them learn to read. We're talking about letters. We're showing how books work. We're learning how to write our names. And these are all steps on the way to learning how to read. Okay, so that's developmentally appropriate practice.